My wife cheated on me with her boss, then secretly stole $250, $0 from our joint account and hid it in offshore accounts. Now she's suing me for half the property after I found out the truth and filed for divorce. I never thought I'd be the guy writing something like this, but here I am. Honestly, the whole thing feels like a bad movie, except it's my life, and I'm the damn fool in it. It all started with little things. My wife Lisa had always been a bit of a bitch. She's sharp-tongued, demanding, and always had a way of making herself the victim. But I loved her, or at least I thought I did. She's gorgeous, long blonde hair, blue eyes, the kind of woman who turns heads everywhere she goes. We've been together for about 8 years, married for 5. We had a nice life, or so I thought. But then, things started changing. She'd come home later than usual, claiming work was hectic. She'd get those little defensive smirks when I asked about her day, and her phone became her new best friend. I'd catch her sneaking around, hiding her texts or deleting them when I entered the room, small things at first, but enough to make me suspicious. I'd ask her about her whereabouts and she'd brush it off, calling me paranoid or insecure. She always had some excuse, some story that made me question my own instincts. But I wasn't stupid. I knew something was off. One night, I decided to do a little digging. I knew she'd been acting weird around her boss, Mark. She'd come home smelling of perfume I didn't recognize, and her stories about late meetings didn't add up. I started paying closer attention, checking her emails, her texts, anything that could give me a clue. That's when I found it. An email from Mark sent the day before titled, "Can't wait to see you tonight." My stomach dropped. I read more and it was clear they'd been seeing each other for months. She'd been lying to my face, pretending everything was fine while she was sneaking around with her boss. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. How could she do this? Not just cheat on me, but lie so blatantly. I was furious, embarrassed, hurt all at once. I wanted to confront her immediately, but I knew I needed to gather more evidence first. I needed to be sure. So I kept digging, and what I found next made my blood boil even more. Hidden in her email drafts was a plan to steal money. She'd been secretly transferring funds from our joint account 250 into offshore accounts. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My wife, the woman I trusted with my life, was not only cheating but also stealing from us. It was a calculated move. She'd been planning this for months, hiding her tracks carefully. I found bank statements, offshore account details, even a fake corporation she'd set up to funnel the money through. She'd been living a double life, and I was just now discovering how deep the rabbit hole went. The betrayal hit me like a freight train. I was devastated, trying to process how someone I loved and trusted could do this to me. The rage started bubbling up. I wanted to scream, to break something, to make her pay for what she'd done. I knew I had to confront her, but I also knew I couldn't do it without a plan. I needed to understand exactly how much she'd taken, how deep her deception ran, and what her next move might be. I sat there, staring at the screen, feeling numb and furious all at once. My mind was racing. What was I going to do? How could I trust her again? Or was it even possible? I felt betrayed on every level, and I knew this was just the beginning of a long, complicated mess. I'd always thought I was a good husband, someone who provided and protected my family. But now I realized I'd been blind, played for a fool, and I wasn't going to let her get away with it. Not without a fight. The next step was clear, even if it was the last thing I wanted to do. I had to confront Lisa face to face. I remember sitting there, staring at the screens, feeling like I was in someone else's nightmare. My hands trembled a little, but I knew I couldn't wait. I couldn't let her keep lying, keep pretending everything was fine. I took a deep breath, shut down my laptop, and headed straight home. When I got there, she was in the kitchen, pouring herself a glass of wine. She looked up when I walked in, that fake innocent smile on her face. She knew I knew something. I could see it in her eyes. I didn't waste time. I laid everything out on the table, her emails, the offshore accounts, the stolen money, everything. Her face twisted into a sneer, her eyes narrowing. "Oh, come on, David," she said, voice dripping with sarcasm. "You're overreacting. You don't have all the facts. You're just being paranoid." I felt my blood pressure spike. Paranoid? Lisa, I found your emails. I saw the bank statements. You've been stealing from us and you've been sleeping with Mark. How do you explain that? She scoffed, crossing her arms. You don't understand, David. It's not what you think. Mark's just a friend, and the money, it's an investment. I was trying to get us out of debt to give us a better life. You're blowing this all out of proportion. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She was lying through her teeth, and she knew it. I could see the guilt in her eyes, but she was doing her best to hide it. I felt sick. All the trust I'd had in her was crumbling. How could she be so callous, so manipulative? I'd caught her in a lie, and now she was spinning some bullshit story about investment and saving us. I told her I wanted her to leave. I couldn't stand to be in the same room with her anymore. She threw a tantrum, calling me jealous, insecure, and accusing me of invading her privacy. She said I was ruining everything, destroying our marriage over some stupid emails. But I knew better. I knew the truth, and I knew I had to do something about it. I felt a mix of anger, heartbreak, and a sense of betrayal so deep I couldn't even put it into words. That night I couldn't sleep. My mind kept racing. I kept thinking about all the lies, the money she'd stolen, the life we'd built on a lie. I wondered how many times she'd been with Mark, how long she'd been planning this. I felt betrayed on every level, my trust, my love, my sense of security. I'd always thought I was a good husband, but now I saw how blind I'd been. She'd been living a double life, and I was just now discovering the extent of her deception. I knew I had to act fast. I couldn't let her get away with this. The money was gone, hidden in offshore accounts, and she was planning to sue me for half the property, another way to punish me for uncovering her lies. I realized she was trying to control everything, to turn the tables and make me the bad guy. But I wasn't going to let her win. I needed to find a way to fight back, to protect what was mine, and to make her face the consequences of what she'd done. I was hurt, furious, and determined. This was only the beginning of what was going to be a very long battle. After that confrontation, everything changed. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach, but I knew I couldn't just sit around feeling sorry for myself. I needed to get my ducks in a row. First, I contacted a lawyer. I didn't want to jump to divorce immediately, but I knew I had to protect my assets and figure out exactly how much she'd stolen. The lawyer, a guy named Mike, listened carefully, looked at the evidence I had gathered, and told me I had a strong case for both financial fraud and infidelity. The offshore accounts were a mess. She'd set them up through shell companies, fake corporations, and used complicated wiring to hide the money. It took days, but I managed to get access to some of her hidden accounts through legal channels. The amount she'd stolen was staggering, around $250, $0, gone without a trace into some offshore bank. I couldn't believe she'd gone this far. It was like she was planning to disappear entirely. Meanwhile, Lisa kept trying to gaslight me, insisting she was innocent, that I was overreacting, that I didn't understand her big plans for our future. She kept calling me paranoid, accusing me of spying on her, and even threatening to sue me for half the property. She said I was ruining everything because I was insecure and jealous. I couldn't believe the level of her lies. She was so good at spinning her stories. I started questioning whether I even knew her anymore. But I wasn't about to let her manipulate me. I started documenting everything: her texts, her emails, bank statements, even her calls with Mark. I wanted proof, not just gut feelings. I also hired a private investigator to follow her around when she was supposed to be at work. Turns out, she was meeting Mark at hotels, not just for business but for sex. I got photos, recordings, enough to prove she'd been unfaithful and lying to my face. That was the moment I realized I'd been played for a fool, and I needed to do something drastic. I sat down one night looking at all the evidence, feeling a mix of anger and sadness. How could she do this? How could she betray me, cheat, steal, and then try to turn the tables on me? My mind kept racing, trying to find a way to get justice. I decided I'd file for divorce, but I also wanted to reclaim what was mine. I wasn't just going to walk away empty-handed. I knew she was planning to sue me for half the property, but I had enough dirt on her to fight back. I'd make sure she paid for her lies and her betrayal. The emotional toll was heavy. I felt like I'd lost my best friend, my partner, my trust in everything. I'd built a life with her, and now I was left with rubble. Every time I thought about her, my stomach clenched. But I also knew I couldn't let her get away with this. I had to be smart, calculated. I had to protect myself and my future. I started thinking about what I'd do next, whether I'd fight her in court, try to reconcile, or just cut my losses and move on. Honestly, I didn't know what was worse, losing everything or facing her in court. Either way, I was determined to get some kind of justice. The hardest part was realizing how much I'd trusted her. I'd been blind, so sure she'd never do something like this. But now I saw her for what she really was, a manipulative, selfish woman who'd throw away everything for her own greed and her affair. I was angry, but I also felt betrayed on a deep level. The woman I'd married was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. Still, I knew I had to stay strong. Whatever came next, I couldn't let her see me broken. I had to fight for what was rightfully mine, and I was going to do it, even if it tore me apart inside. The days that followed were a whirlwind. I spent every spare moment poring over paperwork, talking to my lawyer, and trying to piece together exactly how much she'd taken and how deep her deception ran. I also had to deal with her constant attempts to manipulate the situation, calling me, sending angry texts, trying to guilt-trip me into dropping everything. She insisted she was innocent, that Mark was just a business acquaintance, and that I was paranoid for digging into her life. But I knew better. I had the evidence, and I wasn't about to let her rewrite history. One afternoon, I decided to confront her again. I told her I knew about the offshore accounts, about the stolen money, and about her affair with Mark. Her face twisted in fury. She everything, of course, and then started crying, fake tears, I could tell. She said she was under so much stress, that she'd only ever loved me, and that I was the one who'd betrayed her by accusing her of everything. She claimed she was just trying to make a better life for us, that the money was a mistake, and that Mark was just a friend who'd been helping her with work stuff. I didn't buy any of it. I'd seen her texts, heard her calls, and the evidence was irrefutable. But what really got me was how she turned everything around, how she made herself out to be the victim when she was the one who'd lied, cheated, and stolen. It was infuriating. I told her she needed to leave the house, that I was done, and that I was going to take her to court. That's when she started to threaten me, said she'd sue me for half the property, that she'd fight me every step of the way. She even threw in some nasty comments about how I'd never find anyone better, how I was just a loser, and how she'd make sure I paid for trying to ruin her. It was a shock, but also kind of satisfying. I'd suspected she'd try to play victim, but hearing her actually say it made it real. I realized that she wasn't just after the money or the affair. She was trying to control everything, to turn the tables and make me look like the bad guy. But I was done letting her manipulate me. I was going to fight back, no matter how painful it was. I knew I had to protect what little was left of my dignity, my assets, and my sanity. That night, I sat alone in my living room, staring at the pile of evidence I'd collected. I felt a strange mixture of relief and despair. Relief, because I finally knew the truth and was taking steps to fight back. Despair, because I realized how much I'd been blind, how much I'd trusted her. I'd given her everything, my love, my money, my future, and she had thrown it all away for a quick affair and some offshore cash. I wondered how many other lies she'd told, how many other secrets she kept. I decided then that I would get a divorce, but not just that. I'd take her to court over the stolen money, and I'd fight her for every penny she'd tried to hide. I also started considering how to rebuild my life without her. I'd been comfortable, secure. Now I was facing the chaos of losing everything. It was overwhelming, but I knew I had to stay strong. I couldn't let her win, not this way. I'd come too far, and I was ready to face whatever came next, even if it meant starting from scratch. I just hoped I could find some peace again someday after all this mess. The legal battle was about to begin, and honestly, it felt like I was thrown into a war I didn't sign up for. My lawyer, Mike, laid out everything clearly. How Lisa had been secretly funneling money, the offshore accounts, and the lies she'd spun about everything. We prepared for a nasty fight, knowing she'd do everything to spin her version of the story. I was ready to expose her, but I also knew this wasn't just about money anymore. It was about justice, about making her face what she'd done. One of the hardest moments came when she filed a lawsuit claiming half the property. Her lawyer argued that we were married, and therefore I owed her 50%. She claimed she deserved a share because she'd contributed to the marriage, even though she'd been secretly stealing from me and cheating with Mark. Her legal team even tried to paint me as the bad guy, saying I had trust issues and was controlling. It was classic gaslighting, but I'd been gathering enough evidence to shut her down. I knew her game, and I was ready. In the meantime, I kept digging for more dirt. I found out she'd been planning to move the offshore money to a new account, possibly to disappear altogether. I brought in a financial expert to trace every wire transfer, every offshore shell, and every fake corporation she'd set up. The more I uncovered, the more furious I got. How could someone I loved do this? How could she betray me, cheat on me, and then try to take my house? It was like she was trying to wipe out everything we'd built together. The court hearings were intense. Lisa's side made a lot of noise, trying to paint her as the victim and me as the villain. She claimed she only wanted what was fair, that she'd sacrificed so much for us, and that I'd been a controlling, jealous husband. I sat there seething, knowing the truth. I had the evidence: emails, bank statements, recordings. I handed it all over to my lawyer, who shredded her claims apart. It was clear she'd lied about everything, from her affair to the money. Throughout it all, I felt a strange sense of clarity. I had been naive, trusting her blindly, but now I saw everything clearly. The woman I married was gone, replaced by someone who only cared about herself. But I also learned something important. I was stronger than I thought. I was willing to fight for my rights, for my future, and for the truth. It was a long, exhausting process, and I knew it wasn't over yet. But I was determined to come out on top, to make her face her actions, and to reclaim what was mine. In the end, I realized that betrayal cuts deep, but it also reveals who you really are. I've learned to trust my instincts again, to be cautious and vigilant. I've learned that love and trust are fragile, and that sometimes the best thing you can do is cut your losses and walk away. I don't know what the future holds, but I do know this: I will rebuild. I will move on, and I will never let anyone cheat or steal from me again. That's the lesson I take from all this. And honestly, I hope anyone else going through something similar finds the strength to fight back and never settle for less than they deserve. The court finally made its ruling, and it was a victory I didn't think I'd see when I first uncovered everything. The judge ordered Lisa to pay back the stolen $250, $0 plus interest, and to surrender her claim to the house. The judge also dismissed her claim for half the property. Her attempts to manipulate and lie had backfired spectacularly. It felt like a huge weight was lifted off my shoulders, but the emotional scars still lingered. Trust was shattered, and I knew it would take time to rebuild my life if I ever could fully. In the aftermath, I moved out of the house, leaving behind the memories and the betrayal. I took some time to reflect on everything I'd been through: how love turned into deception, how greed and infidelity had almost destroyed me. I realized I'd been blinded by my own naivety, but I also understood that I was stronger now. The experience had forced me to face the harsh reality that not everyone is who they seem, and that sometimes you have to fight for what's right, even if it costs everything. I started focusing on myself, working out, reconnecting with friends, and trying to rebuild some semblance of normalcy. It wasn't easy. There were days I wanted to break down, days I questioned whether I'd ever find happiness again. But I knew I had to keep going. I learned that you can't control other people's choices, but you can control how you respond to them. The betrayal taught me to be more cautious, to trust but verify, and to never overlook the red flags. Looking back, I realized that the biggest lesson was about self-worth. Lisa's actions showed me that sometimes people will betray you because they value themselves more than the relationship. But I also learned that I deserved better. I deserved honesty, loyalty, and respect. I didn't get that from her, but I found it within myself to move on. Now I'm slowly rebuilding my life piece by piece. I've started saving again, investing, and focusing on my career. I don't know what the future holds, but I do know I won't let this define me. I've come out of it wiser, more cautious, but also more resilient. I want to tell anyone reading this who's going through something similar: don't stay in a toxic situation out of fear or hope. Sometimes you have to walk away, no. matter how painful it is, because in the end, your happiness and integrity are worth more than any relationship built on lies. And as for Lisa, she's facing the consequences of her choices, and I hope she learns something from all this. Me, I'm just glad I finally found the strength to stand up for myself. Life's too short to be betrayed and lied to. I'll keep moving forward, and I'll never let anyone steal my peace again.